Hello everyone, and welcome. You're watching a channel dedicated to exploring fascinating stories, hidden details, and legendary moments from The Lord of the Rings and the wider history of Middle-earth. Today's video is a deep dive into some of the most intense and unforgettable duels ever recorded in Tolkien's world. Moments where single heroes stood against overwhelming darkness and changed the fate of entire ages. In this documentary-style analysis, we'll revisit iconic figures such as Gandalf, Fëanor, Fingolfin, Glorfindel, Turin-Turambar, Hurin, Eärendil, and others, examining not just how they fought, but why their choices mattered. These are not large-scale battles with massive armies, but personal confrontations, moments when courage, despair, and sacrifice collided face to face with evil. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you to support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. We're still a small channel with very few subscribers, and your support makes a huge difference in allowing this content to keep growing and improving. It's also important to note that, in order to respect copyright guidelines, all visuals used in this video were generated using artificial intelligence. Because of that, there may be small inconsistencies between the images you see and the events being described in the narration. The visuals are intended as artistic interpretations, not exact representations. This video is presented as an analytical documentary, focusing on lore discussion, interpretation, and historical context within Tolkien's legendarium. Our goal is to explore these stories thoughtfully, highlighting their meaning, themes, and lasting impact on Middle-earth. With that said, let's begin our journey into the most brutal and legendary duels in the history of Middle-earth, moments that reshaped the world forever. Gandalf the Grey faced one of the most terrifying beings ever to walk Middle-earth. A Balrog, known as Durin's Bane. This creature was no mere monster, but a Maya, a spirit of the same order as Gandalf himself, corrupted in the earliest days by Morgoth, the first and greatest enemy of the world. What was once a being of light had become a demon of shadow and flame, a force of pure destruction lurking beneath Khazad-dûm. On the bridge of Khazad-dûm, the two confronted each other. On one side stood Gandalf, armed with his staff and the elven sword Glamdring. On the other, the Balrog loomed, wielding a flaming sword and a fiery whip that cracked through the air like a promise of death. The demon struck first, its blade blazing, but Gandalf met the blow with precise timing. Glamdring shattered the flaming sword, scattering fire into the darkness. With a single, deliberate strike of his staff, Gandalf broke the bridge beneath the Balrog's feet. The creature fell into the abyss, but in a final act of malice, its whip lashed out and wrapped around Gandalf. Both plunged into the depths below. What followed was a relentless battle far beneath the earth, where the Balrog's infernal fire clashed with Gandalf's enduring will as they fell through endless darkness. At last, they struck the icy waters at the bottom of the chasm. The Balrog's flames were quenched, but the fight did not end. Gandalf pursued the creature through ancient tunnels until they reached the endless stair. Step by step, they climbed, ascending from the deepest roots of the mountain to its highest peak. At the pinnacle of Celebdal, the final confrontation began. The Balrog erupted once more in flame, but Gandalf stood radiant, as if lightning flowed through his blade. Thunder rolled across the sky as the two clashed, their battle echoing like the breaking of the world itself. With a final, decisive blow, Gandalf cast Durin's Bane down, destroying it at last. 10 days had passed since their fall, and the victory came at a terrible cost. Gandalf himself perished, yet this was not the end of his story. By the will of Eru Ilúvatar, he would return, no longer Gandalf the Grey, but Gandalf the White. With his heart burning in relentless fury and a mind consumed by vengeance, Fëanor departed from Valinor and set foot in Middle-earth. His purpose was singular and absolute, to reclaim the Silmarils stolen by Morgoth. There was no rest in him, no doubt, no hesitation. Fëanor desired blood, and he believed the blood of Morgoth himself would be the price that balanced his loss. His presence alone seemed to set the air ablaze, so intense was the fire of his spirit. The moment he arrived, chaos followed. Morgoth unleashed a vast army of orcs to halt Fëanor and the Noldor who followed him. Yet numbers meant little against the wrath of the greatest of the Noldor. Orcs were cut down in droves, swept aside by a force that seemed unstoppable. Driven by obsession, Fëanor surged ahead of his own host, accompanied by only a small group, slaughtering the remnants of Morgoth's forces as he pressed onward toward Angband. As he advanced, Fëanor laughed aloud, a sound filled with defiance and madness. He fought without fear, shouting in fierce satisfaction, fully prepared to die if it meant striking down Morgoth. He did not yet comprehend the full strength of Angban's defenses, nor the trap that awaited him beyond the open fields of Ard Galen. There, the orcs ceased their retreat. Morgoth's forces turned and stood ready. From their ranks emerged the Balrogs, demon lords of fire, led by Gothmog, lord of Balrogs. They surrounded Fëanor and the few who stood beside him. The battle was savage. One by one, his companions fell, but Fëanor did not yield. His sword struck with relentless fury, each blow driven by ancient hatred and unbreakable pride. Even surrounded by Balrogs, Fëanor fought on, standing alone against overwhelming darkness. But no flame, no matter how fierce, could endure forever. Wounded and encircled, Fëanor faced Gothmog himself. Fire clashed with fire in a final, titanic struggle, until Fëanor was struck down, mortally wounded by Gothmog's blows. His sons arrived in time to pull him from immediate death, and the Balrogs withdrew, as if aware that his end was already sealed. His wounds could not be healed by any mortal means. When Fëanor's spirit departed, his body was consumed by the very fire that had defined him, turning to ash and scattering upon the wind. There was no burial, only legend. During the fall of Gondolin, once a glorious elven kingdom hidden from the eyes of Morgoth, an overwhelming host descended upon the city. Dragons, Balrogs, and countless orcs poured through its gates as fire and betrayal consumed its towers. In the heart of the destruction, within the king's square itself, the fate of two titans was sealed. Ecthelion, lord of the House of the Fountain and guardian of the Great Gate of Gondolin, stood face to face with Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, the most dreadful of Morgoth's servants. Without hesitation, Ecthelion advanced. Against him loomed a creature of fire and shadow, vast and merciless, its presence alone enough to break the will of lesser warriors. The battle was brutal and relentless. Ecthelion fought with precision and fearless resolve, his movements sharp and disciplined. Gothmog answered every strike with overwhelming force, each blow shaking the stones beneath their feet. In a moment of savage fury, Gothmog lashed out with his flaming whip, striking Ecthelion's arm and shattering it. The sword fell from the elf's grasp, clattering across the stones. For an instant, all seemed lost. Seeing his enemy wounded and disarmed, Gothmog raised his whip, certain of victory. But Ecthelion, sensing death close at hand, made a final, unthinkable choice. If he was to fall, he would not fall alone. Gathering the last of his strength, he hurled himself forward, not with steel, but with his own body. Driving the sharp spike of his helm into Gothmog's chest, Ecthelion pierced the fiery heart of the Balrog. He wrapped his legs around the demon's massive form, locking them together in a deadly embrace. Together, elf and Balrog plunged into the deep waters of the king's fountain. The cold depths swallowed flame and flesh alike. Gothmog perished, extinguished at last, but Ecthelion did not rise again. Gondolin lost one of its greatest champions that day, yet his sacrifice was beyond measure. In his final act, Ecthelion destroyed the mightiest of the Balrogs, and his name would be remembered as long as songs were sung in Middle-earth. During the fall of Gondolin, amid fire, betrayal, and ruin, a small group of survivors attempted a desperate escape. Wounded warriors, women, and children fled through a narrow mountain passage, clinging to the last hope of survival. Their path, however, was suddenly blocked by a host of orcs and a Balrog. Death seemed inevitable. Then Glorfindel appeared, golden-haired and radiant even in the darkness. Glorfindel stepped forward to face the terror alone. Standing upon a high rock, he saw the Balrog below and leapt down to meet it in battle. His movements were swift and controlled, his expression calm but resolute. The Balrog struck with its flaming whip and clawed hands, and the air around them burned with heat, yet Glorfindel did not falter. Steel met shadow as Glorfindel fought with silent fury, dodging the whip's deadly arcs and pressing the attack. With a precise and powerful blow, he struck the Balrog's helm, sending sparks into the night and giving renewed hope to those watching from above. Knowing that time was short, Glorfindel pressed forward once more, channeling all his strength into a devastating strike against the creature's arm. The blow was so fierce that it severed the Balrog's arm entirely. A terrible scream echoed through the mountains as the creature recoiled in pain and terror. For the first time, fear took hold of the demon. Yet even wounded, the Balrog was not finished. In a final act of desperation, it hurled itself at Glorfindel. The elf did not retreat. He met the charge head-on, striking the Balrog's shoulder and driving his blade deep into its body. But even in death, the demon lashed out. Its remaining hand seized Glorfindel by his golden hair, and together they lost their footing. Locked in a fatal grip, Glorfindel and the Balrog fell into the abyss below. Both perished in the fall. The sacrifice was not in vain. The great eagles, led by Thorindor, descended upon the remaining orcs, scattering them and clearing the path for the survivors. Thorindor later recovered Glorfindel's body, granting him a noble burial. Glorfindel's courage did not go unrewarded. His spirit returned to the Blessed Realm, and his name would rise again in Middle-earth, remembered as one who gave his life so others might live. Glaurung, father of dragons, was a terror that endured through the ages, leaving ruin and despair wherever he crawled. His flames did more than burn flesh, his malice corrupted minds, and his words twisted fate itself. Among all the monsters who served Morgoth, Glaurung was perhaps the cruelest, not because of raw strength alone, but because of his calculated wickedness. No tale proves this more clearly than the tragedy he wove around Turin Turambar. It was Glaurung who ensnared Turin in the darkest of deceptions, driving him to unknowingly wed his own sister and sealing the doom of them both. This story stands as one of the most tragic in all of Tolkien's legendarium. When Glaurung advanced to attack the people of Brethil, the land where Turin lived with his wife, the dragon made his way toward the river Teglin, crossing the deep ravine of Cabd and Aras. Turin knew the creature was not invincible. He remembered how the dwarf Azogl had once wounded Glaurung and revealed his weakness. Beneath the dragon's armored belly lay the only chance. Moving in absolute silence, Turin climbed the ravine. Every step was a balance between life and death, with Glaurung looming above, unaware of the hunter beneath him. The air was heavy with tension. Turin's heart carried not only the fear of the coming strike, but the crushing weight of all the suffering Glaurung had caused him. With his black sword Gurthang in hand, Turin advanced. In one swift and decisive motion, he drove the blade deep into Glaurung's belly, thrusting it to the hilt. The dragon roared, his cry echoing across the land. Gurthang, the cursed blade foretold to strike down both great and small, fulfilled its fate. With that single blow, Glaurung, father of dragons, was slain. Yet the victory carried no joy. In his dying words, the dragon revealed the full truth of Turin's past, tearing away the final veil of deception. With Glaurung's death, the terror ended, but so did Turin. Overcome by the truth of what he and his sister had become, both chose death. Thus, the fall of Glaurung marked not only the end of a dragon, but the complete ruin of Turin Turambar. Hurin, father of Turin Turambar, stood at the center of one of the bloodiest conflicts of the First Age, the Nernath Arnudiad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. To ensure the survival of King Turgon of Gondolin and his army, Hurin and the men of the House of Hador served as bait. The plan was simple and desperate: draw the full wrath of Morgoth's forces toward themselves, allowing Gondolin to withdraw and endure. The plan succeeded, but at an unbearable cost. As the battle collapsed and the elves of many realms were scattered or destroyed, Morgoth's armies turned their full strength against a small host of men. Orcs, trolls, balrogs, dragons, and countless other horrors descended upon them. Hurin and his warriors were surrounded, yet they did not flee. They stood their ground against an army beyond all measure. In the vast field soaked with blood, only one warrior remained standing. Hurin, lord of the House of Hador, stood alone amid a sea of bodies, friend and foe alike, including his own brother. He did not bow, did not falter, and did not tire. For a time, even Morgoth's servants hesitated before a single man who refused to fall. When his sword finally broke beyond use, Hurin cast it aside, threw down his shield, and seized a great axe from a fallen orc captain. He grasped it with both hands, as though it were part of his very soul. Rising once more, he faced the enemy host and advanced. With each swing, black blood smoked upon the blade. Trolls fell like rotted trees beneath his strikes. With every kill, Hurin cried out, "Or in Tuluva, the day shall come again." 70 trolls fell by his hand. Bodies piled so high that Hurin himself was nearly buried beneath them, yet still he fought. Only when Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, stepped forward did the slaughter end. Hurin was seized, bound, and dragged to Angband. Though defeated in body, his spirit remained unbroken. As he was taken away, his voice echoed across the battlefield, repeating his defiance: the day would come again. Eärendil stands among the greatest heroes in the history of Arda, not for glory or conquest, but for sacrifice driven by love. Everything he endured and accomplished was done so that Middle-earth might survive. During the War of Wrath, the final and world-shattering conflict that ended the First Age and brought about the downfall of Morgoth, the hosts of Valinor fought with immense power. Yet even they faced near defeat, for the skies were dominated by dragons, and hope began to fade. Chief among these terrors was Caligon the Black, the greatest and most powerful of all dragons. His presence alone broke the courage of armies, and his shadow darkened the battlefield like a living storm. As victory seemed within Morgoth's grasp, salvation came from the heavens. Eärendil appeared, sailing through the sky aboard his flying ship, accompanied by a host of great birds led by Thorondor, Lord of the Eagles. Seeing his enemy, Caligon rose to meet him. The clash that followed shook the world. Fire and wind tore through the heavens as dragon and mariner collided, their battle echoing across Middle-earth. Caligon's flames scorched the sky, while Eärendil moved with relentless determination, striking with blades of light as he evaded claws and fire. Below them, armies watched as the fate of the age was decided above their heads. The struggle lasted an entire day and night. Exhaustion weighed heavily on Eärendil, but the memory of those he loved and the suffering of Middle-earth drove him onward. As dawn approached, the moment of decision came. In a final, desperate assault, Eärendil struck true, driving his weapon into Caligon's heart. With a thunderous roar, Caligon fell. His massive body crashed into the Thangorodrim, shattering the mountains and reshaping the land itself. The fall of the greatest dragon broke the will of the others. Some were slain, and a few fled in terror, ending Morgoth's last hope of victory. Wounded and weary, Eärendil looked upon the sky as the battle below turned at last toward justice. With Caligon defeated, the chains around Middle-earth began to break, and the long night of the First Age neared its end. A decree was spoken in Valinor that the great hound Huan would not meet his death until he encountered the mightiest wolf ever to walk the world. Long before that fate was fulfilled, Huan became the faithful companion of Luthien Tinuviel, the most beautiful of all the children of Iluvatar. Together, they journeyed toward Tol Ingorith, an isle in the river Sirion, where Sauron held Beren, Finrod Felagund, and others captive within his dark tower. When they reached the bridge that led to the fortress, the sound of Luthien's song carried across the stones. Sauron heard it and knew who approached. Enraged, he sent forth his wolves. One by one, they fell to Huan's jaws, the great hound fighting with unmatched ferocity and speed. Seeing this, Sauron summoned Drogluin, the lord and progenitor of werewolves. The clash was brutal, but once again Huan emerged victorious. Mortally wounded, Drogluin fled and warned Sauron that Huan himself stood outside the gates. Knowing the prophecy that bound Huan's fate, Sauron chose to confront him directly. He took the form of the greatest wolf that had ever existed, a creature of terror and sorcery. His arrival was so dreadful that even Huan recoiled for a moment. Seizing the opportunity, Sauron struck at Luthien, overwhelming her spirit. As she fell unconscious, she cast her dark cloak over Sorin's eyes, bringing a sudden heaviness upon him. Huan attacked without hesitation. The battle shook the forests, growls and howls echoing like thunder. Neither sorcery nor poison, neither spell nor raw strength, could overcome Huan of Valinor. At last, he seized Sauron by the throat and threw him to the ground. Desperate, Sauron shifted forms, from wolf to serpent, from serpent to his familiar shape, but escape was denied. Knowing that defeat meant humiliation before Morgoth, Sauron yielded. He surrendered Tol Ingorith and all that was within it in exchange for his freedom. Huan released him, and Sauron fled in the form of a vampire, leaving behind a trail of blood and the mark of his first great defeat. During the War of the Last Alliance, after years of relentless fighting and countless deaths, the forces of Elendil, commander of men, and Gil-galad, High King of the Elves, finally pressed deep into the lands of Mordor. For 7 long years, the siege of Barad-dûr endured, so unyielding that Sauron himself was forced to emerge from his dark tower. The Lord of the Rings came forth in dreadful form, advancing across the plain of Gorgoroth until he stood near the slopes of Mount Doom, where the One Ring radiated its full and terrible power. The very air trembled with the ring's presence, heavy and oppressive, as though the land itself recoiled in fear. Facing Sauron, Elendil and Gil-galad prepared for the final confrontation. Their weapons gleamed beneath the ash-dark sky, and the resolve to end the shadow burned in their hearts. What followed was a duel that would echo through history. The battle was fierce and merciless. Elendil, wielding Narsil, struck with unbreakable strength, while Gil-galad fought with the speed and grace of an ancient elven king. Together, they pressed Sauron, wounding him again and again. Yet even grievously hurt, Sauron fought like a demon, fueled by hatred and the ring's power. In a brutal exchange, Sauron struck Elendil down, shattering Narsil beneath his fallen body. Turning then upon Gil-galad, He seized the elven king by the throat, the heat of his hand burning flesh and spirit alike. Both kings fell, their sacrifice sealing the cost of victory. But Sorin's triumph was brief. Weakened and brought low, he collapsed, his physical form broken. In that moment, Isildur, son of Elendil, seized the hilt shard of Narsil. With a single, decisive stroke, he cut the one ring from Sorin's hand. As the ring was severed, Sorin's spirit fled, abandoning his body and retreating into shadow, where it would hide for ages. Though Elendil and Gil-galad were lost, their stand ended Sorin's dominion for a time. Their names would be remembered as those who faced the Dark Lord at the edge of Mount Doom and broke his power. Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world, was one of the Valar, a being of angelic power, and it is written that he was once the mightiest among them. Yet his descent into evil came at a cost. Everything he corrupted consumed a portion of his strength, and over time, that power diminished. Even so, his shadow still crushed kingdoms. After the elves suffered a devastating and humiliating defeat in the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, despair spread across the lands of the Noldor. At that time, the High King of the Noldor was Fingolfin, grandfather of Gil-galad. When news reached him of the slaughter and ruin of his people, Fingolfin believed all was lost. Overcome by grief, rage, and hopeless resolve, he mounted his horse and rode forth alone. No one could stop him. Fingolfin sought justice by the edge of his sword, Ringel, bright and cold as ice. He rode like a storm across the desolate lands, his fury so great that those who glimpsed him fled in terror, mistaking him for Orm the hunter himself. When Fingolfin reached the gates of Angband, he sounded his horn, and the echoes shook the iron halls. He struck the gates again and again, challenging Morgoth to come forth and face him in single combat. Though Morgoth still possessed immense power, it is said he alone among the Valar knew fear. He accepted the challenge only to avoid shame before his servants. Rising from his throne, his steps thundered beneath the earth as he emerged. Morgoth stood like a living mountain, clad in black armor, crowned with iron, the Silmarils blazing upon his brow. In his hand he bore Grond, hammer of the underworld. Yet Fingolfin did not falter. His silver armor shone beneath the shadow, his blue shield gleamed, and Ringel flashed like starlight. Morgoth struck first, and each blow of Grond shattered the ground, but Fingolfin leapt aside with blinding speed. 7 times Ringel wounded Morgoth, and 7 times the Dark Lord cried out in pain, his servants trembling at the sound. At last, exhaustion took Fingolfin. Morgoth struck him down, pinning him beneath his foot. With his final strength, Fingolfin struck once more, wounding Morgoth's foot forever. Thus fell Fingolfin, greatest of the elven kings. Morgoth would limp from that wound for all his days, bearing the mark of his humiliation. All these acts of courage were carved into the history of the world, preserved in songs and poems, remembered long after the swords had fallen silent. They are stories that endure because they matter. Each of these heroes could have chosen another path. They could have turned away from danger, protected only themselves, and lived quieter lives far from the reach of shadow. But could they have found peace that way? Could they have lived knowing that, when the world demanded everything of them, they chose to flee? The answer is clear: they could not, and so they stood their ground, facing evil head-on, not in pursuit of glory, but out of necessity. They fought to protect their people, their lands, their freedom, and the fragile hope that light could still prevail. From Gandalf standing against Durin's bane, to Fëanor burning with wrath, to Ecthelion and Glorfindel giving their lives in Gondolin, to Turin facing Glaurung, to Hurin defying an entire army, to Eärendil challenging the skies themselves, to Huan breaking the pride of Sauron, to Elendil and Gil-galad confronting the Dark Lord, and finally to Fingolfin riding alone to Angband. Each of these moments shaped the fate of Arda. They remind us that history is not only forged by armies, but by individuals who refuse to surrender when defeat seems certain. Their sacrifices became legends, sung beside hearthfires, written in great books, and carried forward through generations. Even in worlds filled with magic and monsters, it is the choice to stand firm that defines a hero. This list reflects those moments when courage outweighed fear, when hope survived despair, and when a single stand changed everything. And while many battles were fought across Middle-earth, these duels remain among the most powerful, because they show what happens when someone decides that giving up is not an option. If any of these stories stirred your curiosity, there are countless other tales waiting to be explored, each one another thread in the vast tapestry of Tolkien's world. These legends endure because, in the end, they speak not only of fantasy, but of something deeply human: the will to resist darkness, no matter the cost.